Hello, everyone. In this video, I want to talk a little bit about sunscreens. I was having a quick conversation with a friend of mine, and I told her that sunscreens get absorbed into the blood. And I thought that was something that was fairly common knowledge, but I guess not. And so I wanted to talk about it. That comes from this study out of 2013 when this group out of the University of Exeter did a study where they compared socioeconomic class with the kind of toxins that you find in the blood. It's pretty interesting, actually. So what they found is that higher socioeconomic individuals, so rich people, had more mercury, arsenic, cesium, thallium, perfluoric oxatoic acid, perfluoronanoic acid, some phthalates, and benzophenone 3. This is also known as oxyphenone, oxybenzone, actually. So what they found out is basically, and then poor people basically had more lead, cadmium, antimony, and bisphenol A and 3 phthalates. What this means is people that eat a lot of fish and shellfish had more arsenic, mercury, and thallium in their blood. That's basically richer people. So richer people are eating more shellfish and fish. And so therefore they have higher concentrations of mercury, arsenic, because mercury and arsenic are heavy metals that are kind of bioconcentrated in the apex predator fish that people like to eat, like tuna and salmon and swordfish, things like that. And then the other important mediator was benzophenone 3, which is basically sunscreen. So rich people put a lot of sunscreen on themselves, and it shows up as the sunscreen components show up in their blood, and you can find it in their blood if you just sample them. Poor people have more lead and cadmium and antimony and bisphenol. These come from the use of smoking, living in living in buildings that don't have as good lead control in their plumbing, and then lots of use of cheap disposable plastics. Bisphenol A was very common in like soda drinks and things like that for a while. That's been since been banned, so it probably wouldn't show up now. But those are the lifestyle mediators that determine that. Now, the thing is sunscreen use has been pushed by dermatologists and by pretty much every public health agency because sunscreens are known to decrease the risk of skin cancer and melanoma. And in kind of our beauty obsessed culture, sunscreens do probably prevent some photo aging of skin because UVA and UVB are associated. Well, UVA is more associated with photo aging and UVB is more associated with skin cancer, but there's some overlap between the two. And so people have said, oh, you should wear sunscreen every day. If you talk to any dermatologist, that's like kind of the mantra. You should wear sunscreen every day. If you talk to any, cosmetics people, beauty influencers or whatever, they're all pushing the sunscreen. Now, the issue is that we need sunlight. Sunlight is very good for you. And we need sunlight to modulate our immune function, our endocrine function, our diurnal patterns, and most importantly, we need it for vitamin D. And vitamin D deficiency is probably affecting almost 50% of the world's population at this point. Partially because we are supposed to be outside. I mean, we are not supposed to be an indoor species. Look at every living thing out there. No one is an indoor species other than human beings, and we are indoors for most of the time. And then what the problem is people are indoors all the time, and then they want to go to spend 6 hours at the pool or at the beach or at the park all at one go, and then their body and their skin is just not ready for that load of sunlight. You need like a little bit of sunlight every day, and so your body's ready for it, and you can make vitamin D, and you can get the effects, the health effects of vitamin D. And so there's a lot of health effects beyond vitamin D. And vitamin D is a very important molecule, and it is a cancer. It protects you against cancer. It modulates immune function. You can get direct immune suppression from UV radiation through T regulatory cell upregulation. This may prevent autoimmune diseases. It produces alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone. It helps with calcitonin, neuropeptide P, endorphins. It increases. So endorphins are a natural opiate that helps you feel good and modulates mood and helps with psychosocial things. There are all kinds of things that are good in sunlight. and helps modulate serotonin and melatonin and a lot of neurotransmitters. So anyways, sunlight is not bad for you. And in fact, if you look at how many adjusted life years are caused by UV overexposure, that's 0.1%. How many quality adjusted life years are caused by underexposure and loss of vitamin D? What does it say here? It says 3.3 billion. Okay, so a lot more. Um, so in the big scheme of things, in terms of overall health, you're better off probably getting more sun exposure than less sun exposure. That's kind of, but I'm not advocating that people go out there and just like sunbathe with no sunscreen out there. We should try to, you can't go out there for 8 hours a day and just like bake yourself in the sun when you've been indoors the whole time. And if you're going to spend a day at the beach or the pool, you should cover up. And I think the best way to prevent sun exposure is to wear a hat and wear clothing, wear a rash guard, things like that. Okay, so let's talk about sunscreens. The best article, if you want to learn about sunscreens, is this review article, which was written by the Journal of the American Academy of Dermatology. Obviously, they are pro sunscreen, as all dermatologists are, but they present a very good paper. It's behind a paywall. Fortunately, I work at a university and I have access to behind this paywall, so here you go. The important things that we need to realize about sunscreen is there's basically two kinds of sunscreen. There is the inorganic agents. These are usually UV blockers. They're like chemical blockers. They're zinc oxide and titanium dioxide. That they basically work by blocking the sun. And then there's organic agents, and these are benzophenones, avobenzone, and the BP3, like they talked about as one of the toxins that they found in the blood. Um, let's see, yeah, so if I can find it here. Avobenzone, I think, yeah, it's oxybenzone. So oxybenzone is is the same thing as benzophenone 3. So oxybenzone and benzophenone 3 are actually two different names for the exact same molecule. So if you look at this, go down to the safety and adverse effects of sunscreen. You can get contact dermatitis, although that is rare. And there was a very common sunscreen ingredient called PABA, PABA. You may remember that if you're kind of older. You remember this from the 90s. That's been banned because it's shown that it may actually increase the risk of cancer by causing free radicals. And there was a lot of contact dermatitis with that molecule. Mixed reporting regarding the penetration of and systemic effects of microfine inorganic agents. So when I use sunscreen, I prefer to use the titanium dioxide or zinc oxide because there's less absorption of those things. However, the problem is when you make them, the initial ones of zinc oxide and titanium dioxide, you looked very white when you put it on, and it didn't look great. And so they're trying to make the particles smaller and smaller so they don't look like they're white on your face or on your body. But by making that, they become nanoparticles and they get small enough that they work differently. They work in a different layer and they can penetrate into cells. And we'll talk about that a little bit. And then oxybenzone and octinoxate have been detected in plasma urine afterward. So yeah, these are issues. And if you look at these papers, like this one is titanium dioxide. In this paper, they found that it actually penetrates the cell membrane of fibroblasts and causes problems within the cells there. This paper looks at the photocarcinogenic effects. So when you make the particles smaller, so in the same compounds in larger particle form work by reflecting the radiation, so they block it and reflect it out. In nanoparticle form, they absorb the radiation. So when you make the particles small enough, instead of reflecting, they actually absorb. And when it absorbs, it takes the energy from the UV radiation and it causes reactive oxygen species. And those can cause cancer because they're free radicals and they damage DNA and things like that. And so can be a potential problem. If you look at this, safety effects of sunscreen formulations in vitro and in vivo studies. And so then they're looking at that there are some problems with some penetration with these smaller particles. And what are these uh, organic compounds? So if you look at suns, this is a paper out of American Chemical Society. So UVA is kind of the longer wavelength, has deeper penetration. This causes more photoaging because you're going to get absorption into the collagen of the dermis, and that's what gives you wrinkles and things like that. And then UVB is a higher energy, shorter wavelength, and it causes more direct DNA damage. Both of these kind of have some overlap, however. And if you look at this, there's active ingredients such as avobenzone. This is an organic compound or an occlusive compound like zinc oxide. Then there's all these thickeners and solvents and preservatives and emulsifiers. A lot of these agents are kind of problematic as well. Then there's sensory enhancers. They make it feel better, fragrances and stuff, plus or minus on that. And then these are the major FDA approved chemicals: avobenzone, oxybenzone, and I can't pronounce this, octinoxate. If you look at these, there's a thing called right here. It's a benzene ring. Benzene rings are very common in here, and they're when they synthesize these molecules, they start with benzene. That's been an issue. Benzene is highly toxic and carcinogenic, and there was a recall on a lot of sunscreen brands. They were pulled from the shelves after they showed they contained a significant amount of benzene. It's just because if they're manufacturing it and they don't clean out the benzene very well, then it stays in the compound, and that's obviously problematic. But the benzene rings are in here. These in and of themselves are not that toxic, but they have their own issues. But the way that these things work is the UV radiation gets into these molecules, and the benzene rings help dissipate the energy, and they undergo a chemical reaction, and they turn into a different compound many times, and that's why you have to reapply, because these materials basically react and turn into an more inert species that don't absorb the UV, but they basically instead of reflecting the UV, they absorb the UV and they turn it into heat. And a lot of them do actually generate free radicals while they do this, which is why they sometimes put antioxidants into the sunscreens to help mitigate the effects of the free radicals that they generate. So these things, they have endocrine disruption. Avobenzone and this octinoate, they can cause thyroid and endocrine disruption. Um, they can cause obesogenic phenotypes. So, there's some thought that they maybe contribute to obesity. They also affect embryonic trophoblast cells, and can cause cell death in these things. And if you look at BP3 or oxybenzone, there are the association of BP3 levels on thyroid hormone, testosterone levels, kidney function, and prebortal timing has been reported, prompts further attention investigation to validate true association. So there's some correlation, but causation has not been proven on these things. However, there's enough information that makes me kind of worry about them. So personally, I don't use them very much. I do try to limit my sun exposure by wearing clothing, but I also try to get some sun exposure every day. I get about an hour of sun exposure every day. When I bike into work in the morning, I get some sun exposure. In the afternoon, when I come back, I get some sun exposure. Obviously, I'm wearing clothing while I'm doing this, and I do wear a helmet, so I get some sun protection. I'm probably getting a little more sun than I need, and I probably should use some kind of sunscreen on my face. There's definitely a lot of photo aging going on. But this idea that you have to use sunscreen every day, um, I'm kind of like contrary to the medical establishment on this. And I think that probably the blocking of sunlight and reduction of vitamin D and the other good effects of sunlight um, are worse than the increased risk of skin cancer. So I think the risk of skin cancer is less than the risk of other cancers that you get from hypovitaminosis and from the other side effects of not getting enough sunlight. So personally, I think the best form of sun protection is clothing. The second best is um, non-nanoparticle titanium dioxide or zinc oxide preparations. And probably the most concerning from an endocrine disruption and a toxicity standpoint are the avobenzone and other absorptive UV sunscreens. They are absorbed systemically into your body, and they probably have a lot of small side effects that are not big enough to show up, but over a long time probably have some health consequences for people. Okay, so I'll link some of these papers in the description below. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, everyone.